Welcome, the anointed ones. Every secret eventually chooses a side, truth or destruction. And in your case, the secrets chose destruction, and they destroyed the people who created them. Before we dive into the full breakdown, let's start with something researchers have actually proven. The human mind can only juggle so many lies before it begins betraying itself. Psychologists call it cognitive leakage. That moment when someone is trying so hard to keep a story straight that the truth slips out like a prisoner making a jailbreak. And let's be honest, the people who plotted against you weren't exactly the brightest architects of manipulation. They were holding lies together with cheap emotional glue, hoping nothing would fall apart. Spoiler alert, everything fell apart. What makes this story wild is how their collapse didn't happen quietly or gracefully. No, they cracked like a phone screen dropped face first on concrete, and they spilled everything. Every secret meeting, every whispered plan, every ridiculous strategy they invented as if they were auditioning for a villain role nobody hired them for. What they didn't know, what they couldn't know, is that the universe has impeccable timing and a petty sense of humor. You were out there minding your business, surviving storms and leveling up, while they were backstage holding emergency meetings, trying to figure out why their plots kept backfiring. They thought they were controlling the narrative. Meanwhile, life was preparing a plot twist so sharp it sliced through every lie they ever told. And the beauty of it? The truth didn't come out because you forced it. The truth came out because their own guilt clock expired. Their alliance crumbled, their confidence deleted, their secret plans leaked like a bucket with 30 holes. It's funny, people always assume exposure comes from enemies being caught, but sometimes exposure comes from enemies being tired of pretending, tired of covering for each other, tired of acting like a coordinated unit when, in reality, they could barely coordinate their own lives. By the time everything spilled, it wasn't even shocking, it was poetic. So buckle up, because what you're about to hear isn't just a story of people being messy, it's a story of people being exposed by the very plot they thought would break you. And trust me, once we unpack what really happened behind your back, you'll understand exactly why they cracked the way they did. Number one, they never expected you to outlive their storyline. The people who plotted against you didn't just try to harm you. They tried to design who you were supposed to become. They built an entire version of your future in their heads, a future where you stayed small, confused, overwhelmed, and stuck in the damage they caused. Their plan wasn't simply to sabotage your progress. It was to trap you inside a narrative that kept you predictable and powerless. They truly believed they had the authority to decide your limits. What they could never predict was your ability to outgrow environments meant to suffocate you. Their storyline depended on you staying in emotional quicksand. They counted on you breaking down. They counted on you being too exhausted to fight for your life. They counted on you repeating the same cycles they pushed you into. And most of all, they counted on you being blind to how heavily they were influencing your path. Their confidence came from the assumption that you would never evolve beyond the version of yourself they preferred. So when you started developing mentally, spiritually, emotionally, when you began making decisions from a place of clarity instead of pain, the foundation of their entire scheme cracked. They never planned for your rise. They never prepared for your healing. They never imagined a world where you would stop seeing yourself through their judgment and start seeing yourself through the truth. Your transformation became the plot twist that destroyed their plot. And that's why everything eventually spilled. When someone's manipulation stops working, panic sets in. Suddenly, the lies don't stick. The alliances don't hold. The whispers don't hit the same. People begin to talk because the storyline they tried to control collapses the moment you step out of the role they assigned you. You outlived the version of you they needed in order to stay powerful. And once you outlived their storyline, you made their entire operation pointless. That's when the truth leaks, not because they grew honest, but because their plan ran out of oxygen the moment you reclaimed your own narrative. Number 2, their guilt became louder than their lies. When people plot against you, they usually think they can outrun their guilt. They convince themselves that if they stay committed to the story, keep repeating it, keep defending it, eventually the lie will become their truth. But guilt has a way of growing quietly in the background, like a pressure building under the floorboards. At some point, it gets too heavy to hide. That's exactly what happened with the ones who targeted you. They didn't confess because they suddenly became noble or morally awakened. They confessed because the weight of what they did started crushing every part of them. Guilt is sneaky like that. It doesn't show up all at once. It starts with small cracks, trouble sleeping, nerves getting shaky, overthinking conversations, avoiding people who know too much. Then it grows into something louder, anxiety that hits out of nowhere, fear of being exposed, paranoia that everyone can see right through them. They begin rehearsing their lies in their head so often it becomes mentally exhausting. And sooner or later their guilt becomes stronger than their ability to pretend. That's when the truth slips out, sometimes in pieces, sometimes all at once. People underestimate how loud guilt can be. It interrupts their thoughts. It messes with their decision-making. It makes them overreact to things that used to feel normal. The guilt of what they did to you became a constant reminder that the story they were pushing was built on harm, jealousy, insecurity, and manipulation. And the moment they realized they couldn't handle the mental noise anymore, they cracked. You didn't need to confront them. You didn't need to expose them. Their own conscience turned into a spotlight they couldn't escape. And here's the deeper truth. They were never prepared for the emotional bill that comes with tearing down an innocent person. They thought their lies would hold forever. But guilt is the interest payment on wrongdoing, and eventually it becomes too expensive to maintain. That's why everything spilled. Their guilt spoke louder than all the lies they ever told, and once it started talking, it refused to shut up. Number 3, their plot became useless the moment you grew. The biggest mistake they made was underestimating your ability to rise above what they threw at you. Every plan, every scheme, every calculated move they made was built on the assumption that you would stay broken, that you would stay vulnerable, and that their efforts would matter. They treated you like a chess piece they could manipulate, but they didn't account for one crucial factor: your growth. Growth changes everything. Growth breaks systems. Growth makes every plot, every manipulation, every secret effort irrelevant. As you began evolving, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually, their strategies lost their power. The lies that were supposed to hold weight suddenly felt empty. The people who were meant to execute the plan realized it was pointless, because the target, the person they thought they could control, was no longer in the same place. You were no longer playing by the rules they set. You were no longer the person they expected to see, the one who would stumble at every obstacle. You became unpredictable to them, untouchable and unstoppable. Their operation, which once seemed meticulous and clever, became nothing more than wasted energy and embarrassing miscalculations. And when a plot becomes useless, it's only a matter of time before cracks appear. People start pointing fingers, mistakes start stacking up, and the original plan collapses under its own weight. They try to cover, they try to salvage, they try to intimidate, but it's all irrelevant now. You've grown beyond their reach. You've evolved beyond their influence. The very thing they thought would crush you is the thing that exposed them. This is why the truth spilled. They had nothing left to manipulate, no leverage left to hold over you, and no reason to keep the secret alive. Their plot, which they believed was powerful enough to break you, had already been rendered obsolete, and the realization of their uselessness forced them to panic and confess. You didn't need to fight. They were defeated simply because you outgrew the battlefield they thought they controlled. Growth, in this case, became the silent weapon that destroyed their entire operation. Number 4. Someone in their circle decided you were too pure to destroy. Not everyone in their group was as cold-hearted as they appeared. Somewhere among the people who conspired against you, there was at least one person who couldn't ignore the truth any longer. They saw what was happening, they saw how unjust it was, and they realized that no matter how much harm the others tried to inflict, your integrity, strength, and clarity remained untouchable. You were not just surviving, you were thriving in a way that made the whole charade impossible to justify. And for that reason alone, someone chose to step off the sidelines and break the code of silence. It's fascinating how this works. People who plot against others often operate in bubbles of delusion, convinced that their alliances are unbreakable. But alliances built on fear, jealousy, and insecurity always have cracks. And in those cracks, conscience can sneak in. That's what happened here. Someone quietly watched everything unfold and decided that enough was enough. They weren't motivated by loyalty to you, at least not in the obvious way. They were motivated by recognition of your worth, your unshakable spirit, and the simple truth that harming you was not just wrong, it was unsustainable. This is the turning point where the plot begins to unravel. When someone in the inner circle decides morality outweighs loyalty to a scheme, the entire network of lies becomes unstable. Whispers turn into confessions, secrets turn into evidence, and the manipulators suddenly realize their control is slipping. You didn't have to expose them, threaten them, or outsmart them. They exposed themselves because the moral compass of one person couldn't bear to see you crushed anymore. And what makes it even more striking is that this decision didn't come from weakness. It came from clarity. Someone finally recognized the difference between what was easy and what was right, and their choice to act created a chain reaction. The plot that once seemed secure now collapsed because they had underestimated the power of human conscience. Your purity, your resilience, and your silent strength were enough to ignite that awakening, and that was enough to crack the entire operation. Number 5, they realized you were the wrong person to bet against. At some point, they stopped seeing you as a target and started seeing you as a force they could never contain. The moment they realized that every plan, every lie, every manipulation had failed to shake you, panic set in. They began to understand that they weren't just dealing with someone who could be pushed around. They were dealing with someone who would rise no matter the pressure, someone whose strength and clarity outmatched their cruelty. That realization is terrifying for manipulators because it flips the entire power dynamic. The hunter becomes the hunted, the scheme collapses, and fear replaces the arrogance that fueled the original plot. This isn't about you being strong in some vague sense. It's about the undeniable fact that their calculations were flawed from the start. They assumed you could be controlled, that your reactions could be predicted, that your pain could be weaponized. Every assumption they made was rooted in underestimating you, and that underestimation became their undoing. They watched as your life kept moving forward, as your mind stayed sharp, and as your spirit refused to bend. Each small victory of yours made their plan weaker, and their confidence began to crumble with every failed attempt to manipulate you. Fear has a way of forcing honesty. The moment they understood that they had chosen the wrong person to bet against, the panic made them spill pieces of the truth they had worked so hard to hide. Their confessions weren't about admitting wrongdoing. They were about self-preservation. They realized that continuing the plot against you would only escalate their own risk. The wrong person, after all, is never the one who bends. They are the one who exposes everything intentionally or not, simply by existing and refusing to comply with the story crafted for them. By the time the truth came out, they were trapped by their own misjudgment. Their arrogance, their scheming, and their sense of control evaporated the moment they recognized the magnitude of your presence. You weren't just untouchable, you were their miscalculation. And that realization alone shattered the very foundation of everything they had plotted. Number 6, your silence made their actions echo. One of the most dangerous things you did, without even realizing it, was stay quiet while they worked so hard to destroy you. Every insult, every scheme, every whispered plan they plotted against you was amplified by your calm, silent endurance. People who plot against others rely on reactions. They thrive on chaos, on fear, on anger. They want to see flinches, emotional breakdowns, confusion, hesitation. Your silence denied them all of that. It didn't make you weak. It made their lies louder. Every action they took, every word they whispered, suddenly existed in a vacuum where no one could hide from the consequences of their own behavior. By not responding, you forced the truth to speak for itself. Their manipulations, once carefully hidden, became painfully obvious when you didn't react. Lies that were meant to confuse became glaringly transparent. The energy you gave, or rather didn't give, acted like a spotlight, highlighting the cracks they tried to cover up. You weren't fighting, arguing, or justifying yourself. You were simply living your life, standing firm, and letting their actions reflect exactly what they were. Silence in this case wasn't absence, it was strategy, whether intentional or instinctual, and it made their guilt, fear, and incompetence impossible to ignore. And this is what makes it so extraordinary. Your quietness forced them to confront themselves. Without your reaction, they couldn't manipulate reality in their favor. Every conversation, every secret meeting, every deceitful alliance they formed became evidence of their own failure. Their lies had nowhere to hide because you were the calm center in the storm they thought they controlled. In the end, your silence didn't just protect you, it revealed them. It made them desperate, nervous, and exposed. It forced the confession, the slip, the unraveling of the entire plot. They underestimated your power to stand still, to endure, and to let truth do the heavy lifting. And when the dust settled, it was clear. You didn't need to fight for justice, argue for clarity, or expose them yourself. Your silence did it all, echoing louder than any words ever could. Number 7, they couldn't keep the story straight anymore. Lies are fragile. They can only survive when everyone involved remembers their place, repeats the same lines, and keeps the act consistent. The people plotting against you didn't realize that plotting against someone sharp and aware comes with a built-in time bomb. The longer they tried to control the narrative, the more impossible it became to maintain. Every added layer of deception required precision, and precision wasn't their strong suit. They fumbled details, contradicted each other, and slowly, almost imperceptibly, their story started to unravel. When a plot relies on multiple people, the first crack always appears with memory. Who said what? Who knew what? Who was supposed to cover for whom? It starts small. Someone mixes up a meeting, someone exaggerates, someone forgets the timing. But those small mistakes pile up like snow in an avalanche. Eventually, the plotters are trapped by the very lies they created. They have to lie to cover previous lies, and each lie adds tension until the whole story becomes impossible to hold together. This is exactly how their entire operation collapsed. The plot was never just about hurting you. It was a performance, a fragile illusion held together by fear and coordination. But fear alone doesn't fix bad memory, poor planning, or conflicting egos. Once one person slipped up, the others followed. either out of panic or because they were trying to patch a hole in the web of deception. The inconsistencies became glaring, and soon enough, the lies were louder than their control. And that's when the truth came spilling out. They didn't confess because they wanted to. They confessed because they couldn't do otherwise. The story had become unmanageable, and every attempt to hold it together only made it worse. Their fear, their stress, and their inability to keep track of their own fiction forced them to break. In the end, the very structure they built to trap you ended up being the thing that exposed them. Their collapse wasn't dramatic, it was inevitable. Lies, after all, are like sandcastles, and you can only hold them together for so long before the tide of reality washes them away. Number 8, their plot couldn't survive your energy. There's a kind of power that doesn't need words, actions, or confrontation. It just exists. Your energy, the way you carried yourself, the way you navigated life despite everything thrown at you, became a force they couldn't reckon with. They didn't realize that the strength of someone who refuses to be broken isn't just invisible. It's contagious, magnetic, and most importantly, revealing. Every move they made to control, manipulate, or sabotage you was countered, not with resistance, but with the quiet intensity of your presence. Your energy shone so clearly that their lies and schemes were impossible to hide. They tried to keep the plot tight, coordinated and secret, but energy has a way of exposing weakness. Your consistency, your calm in the chaos, and your refusal to feed into their manipulations made them uncomfortable. They could see the gap between who they thought you were and who you really were. Every manipulation they attempted reflected back on them because you carried a frequency they couldn't touch, a clarity they couldn't distort. They tried to ignore it, tried to push harder, tried to recruit others, but the more they struggled, the more transparent their actions became. Energy like yours doesn't just protect, it exposes. People around you start noticing inconsistencies, rumors lose weight, alliances weaken, and eventually the pressure of being seen becomes unbearable. They spilled because the tension created by your unwavering energy made it impossible to continue the charade. You didn't have to confront anyone. Your life, your demeanor, and your strength forced the cracks to appear naturally, and that's what makes it devastating for them. They realized too late that the very thing they were trying to manipulate had already revealed the truth. Your energy didn't just outshine their lies, it dismantled the entire foundation of the plot. It forced exposure without a word, without a fight, and without a single dramatic confrontation. Their failure wasn't because of evidence, clever moves, or pressure. It was because your energy, consistent and unyielding, left no room for deception to survive. Number 9, they finally understood that you saw more than you spoke. From the very beginning, they assumed you could be deceived, distracted, and controlled, and they treated your silence as weakness. What they didn't realize is that while you weren't speaking, you were observing, analyzing, and cataloging everything they were doing. Every lie, every scheme, every attempt to manipulate or undermine you was recorded in your mind. You didn't need to respond, argue, or retaliate because your awareness itself was a silent witness to everything. And that awareness is terrifying for people who build their power on secrecy. They eventually realize that no amount of deception can survive in front of someone who notices everything. It's easy to underestimate the power of someone who doesn't react. They thought your calmness meant ignorance. They thought your patience meant passivity. They assumed that the more you held back, the more opportunities they had to control the narrative. But as time passed, they began to sense that their carefully constructed lies weren't landing the way they expected. Small things they said in private contradicted each other. Their stories didn't line up, and their confidence began to falter. The silence that once seemed like compliance suddenly became a mirror, reflecting their dishonesty and incompetence in full view. And that mirror is what made them crack. They realized you were never naive, never blind, and never easily fooled. You had always seen more than they could handle, more than they were willing to admit, and certainly more than they could control. Once that realization hit, panic set in. Lies began spilling out, alliances faltered, and the plot that had been tightly held together for months or even years started collapsing from the inside. The truth didn't come out because you demanded it, confronted it, or exposed it. It came out because they finally understood that no matter how much they manipulated words, actions, or circumstances, you had already seen everything. You were too aware, too perceptive, and too grounded for their plot to remain intact. The weight of being seen in full light is unbearable for someone who thrives in darkness, and that is exactly what forced them to break and spill it all. Number 10, the person they trusted the most became their weakest link. Every group of people who plot against someone has one person who thinks they're untouchable, the one they believe is the smartest, the most loyal, or the most careful. Ironically, that's almost always the person who ends up being the weak link. In their arrogance, they put too much faith in someone who couldn't handle the pressure, someone whose ego or nerves were larger than their sense of loyalty. That person becomes the crack in the armor, the point where the carefully constructed plot starts to fall apart. The dynamic is brutal and inevitable. When you're plotting against someone, you depend on everyone keeping secrets perfectly, remembering all the lies, and covering each other's mistakes flawlessly. But humans aren't perfect. Even the most loyal accomplice has limits. Stress, fear, guilt, or even simple overconfidence can push them over the edge. And once that weak link begins to falter, the entire operation becomes unstable. Lies start slipping, inconsistencies emerge, and the tension between the plotters grows so intense that the story they tried to control starts unraveling at lightning speed. This is exactly how your enemy's plan collapsed. The person they trusted most, the one they believed would never crack, was the first to stumble. Maybe they were nervous, maybe their conscience spoke too loudly, or maybe they simply got caught in their own web of lies. Whatever the reason, their failure triggered a chain reaction. Confessions started leaking, mistakes became obvious, and the rest of the conspirators began panicking. Their plan, which had seemed airtight, crumbled because it relied on one person who couldn't hold the weight of the deception. By the time the truth came out, it wasn't just a slip-up. It was a full-scale collapse. Their confidence, their control, and their power evaporated because they had placed too much trust in the wrong person. And that weak link, the one they believed was their secret weapon, became the instrument of their exposure. The lesson is clear. In any plot built on deception, the greatest vulnerability is always the person who believes they are untouchable, because in reality, that is exactly the person who will break first. Number 11. They thought you were isolated, but you were observed by higher forces. One of the biggest mistakes they made was assuming you were alone, that no one was watching over you, and that the chaos they orchestrated would go unnoticed. They acted as if your life was a blank canvas they could deface without consequence, as if every move they made could stay hidden in the shadows. What they didn't realize is that forces beyond their comprehension were quietly observing everything, tracking every scheme, every manipulation, every attempt to harm you. It's not about luck or coincidence. It's about timing, alignment, and the inevitable justice that catches up with those who act in darkness. The irony is brutal. They were meticulous, thinking that their planning and coordination made them untouchable. They believed secrecy was their armor, but they underestimated the fact that the universe, or whatever higher system governs the balance of actions and consequences, has its own way of recording, noticing, and acting. Every deception, every whisper, Every attempt to twist reality against you was being observed in ways they could never see. An observation, in this case, wasn't passive. It set the stage for exposure. That's why their plot couldn't hold. The more they tried to manipulate events and control outcomes, the more the higher forces allowed inconsistencies to accumulate. Small slips, contradictory stories, and nervous behaviors were magnified, amplified, and eventually impossible to ignore. By the time the confession came, it wasn't a surprise. It was inevitable. What they assumed was secrecy became their undoing because someone or something was always watching, always timing, always waiting for the right moment to expose the full truth. And that's the deeper lesson they could never grasp. No matter how smart, how sneaky, or how cruel someone thinks they are, being in the wrong against the right person attracts scrutiny beyond human vision. Their arrogance made them blind, and that blindness allowed their actions to be fully revealed. You weren't alone, you weren't powerless, and the moment they tried to destroy you, higher forces ensured that their own deception became their downfall. Every confession, every leak, every unraveling was proof that someone or something was quietly keeping score. Number 12. They confessed because they needed an exit strategy. The moment they realized that continuing the plot against you was more dangerous than walking away, panic set in. People rarely spill secrets because of morality. They spill secrets because they see the walls closing in and suddenly want a way out. That's exactly what happened here. The plotters weren't confessing out of kindness or remorse. They confessed because survival instincts kicked in. The entire operation they built to control, manipulate, and harm you became a liability, and the only way to protect themselves was to start talking. When someone invests so much energy into a scheme, they convince themselves that it's safe. They believe that loyalty within their circle, fear, and careful deception will protect them. But once cracks begin to form, the person they trusted the most, the unexpected conscience in their circle, or even their own slipping memory, can force them into a corner. Suddenly, the narrative they thought was untouchable is collapsing, and the consequences of continuing in silence seem far worse than admitting pieces of the truth. Their confession is not courage, it's calculation. They start releasing information strategically, hoping to minimize damage while appearing cooperative, hoping to secure an exit before the full weight of their misdeeds catches them. What's fascinating is how desperation exposes everything. When they start thinking about self-preservation, the careful choreography of lies becomes impossible to maintain. Details they thought buried leak out, alliances crumble, and inconsistencies explode. The exit strategy, which begins as a whisper in private, quickly turns into a flood, and all the while, they are frantically trying to protect themselves from the fallout they created, which ironically exposes the entire plot faster than any investigation or confrontation could. In the end, the confession is as much about them as it is about you. They realize too late that the game they started wasn't winnable, that their choices had trapped them, and that continuing to hide the truth was a risk too big to take. Their need to escape forced the story into the open, spilling everything they tried to keep secret. You didn't need to confront them. Their survival instinct did it for you. Number 13. Your resilience made them realize they were fighting destiny. They weren't just targeting you. They were trying to fight against a force they didn't understand. Every plot, every manipulation, every backhanded plan they created was meant to control your path. But they underestimated the fact that your life wasn't theirs to dictate. Your resilience, your ability to endure, adapt, and rise no matter what they threw at you, shattered their sense of control. It wasn't that you were lucky or that things just worked out. It was that their entire scheme collided with something far greater than their understanding: destiny, timing, and the undeniable strength of someone refusing to be broken. As they watched, panic grew. Their whispers, strategies, and alliances, which were supposed to intimidate and weaken you, had the opposite effect. The more they tried to force a narrative, the more it became clear that you were untouchable in ways they could never explain. Every attack, every lie, every betrayal became fuel for your growth rather than a weapon against you. And the deeper they realized this, the more desperate and reckless they became. The very person they thought they could crush was, in fact, moving exactly where they were supposed to be, unfolding exactly how they were meant to unfold. This realization is what forces people to spill secrets. When someone recognizes they are fighting a purpose or a calling, panic replaces confidence. They don't just fear failure, they fear consequences that extend beyond human retaliation. Their entire plot begins to crumble under the weight of inevitability. They can no longer hold the facade because reality, your resilience, and the undeniable momentum of destiny are all pointing at the truth. By the time everything came out, it wasn't because of your confrontation or exposure. It was because they realized they were fighting against something far bigger than themselves. Your survival, your growth, and your unshakable spirit made them understand that they weren't just failing. They were losing against destiny itself. And in that moment of fear and realization, everything they tried to hide came pouring out, leaving no part of their plan untouched, no secret unrevealed, and no lie unexposed. Number 14, they finally saw themselves through the mirror you never held. The moment the truth spilled, it wasn't just about exposing their plot against you. It was about forcing them to confront themselves. All the scheming, manipulation, and hidden agendas were eventually reflected back in a way they could no longer ignore. They had always assumed that by controlling your life, controlling your reactions, and controlling the narrative, they could remain untouchable. But the irony is brutal. Their own actions became the mirror, and they couldn't escape the reflection. Every lie, every betrayal, every strategy they thought was secret was suddenly undeniable, and the person staring back at them was far worse than anyone else could have shown them. This is the turning point where arrogance meets reality. They weren't just exposed to you, they were exposed to themselves. For the first time, they saw the consequences of their choices, the magnitude of their cruelty, and the absolute futility of their efforts. The plot they designed to control and harm someone else became the evidence of their own moral bankruptcy. And that realization is devastating because it's intimate and unavoidable. They couldn't blame circumstances, other people, or accidents anymore. The reflection was theirs and theirs alone. That's why the confession came spilling out. They weren't confessing to you. They were confessing to themselves in the most public and undeniable way possible. Panic and shame became the channels through which the truth was revealed, because once you become aware of your own failures and malice, hiding them becomes impossible. The mirror forces honesty, whether one wants it or not, and in their case, it forced exposure. By the time the entire plot was revealed, it was clear that what broke them wasn't confrontation. It was self-recognition. They finally understood who they were in the full light of their own deception. And the irony is that this revelation didn't just destroy their plot. It dismantled the narrative they had built about themselves. Their identity as schemers, manipulators, and victors in their own story evaporated the moment they saw the truth in themselves. You didn't need to hold the mirror. They held it, and it shattered from the weight of the truth. Conclusion. What all of this reveals is far deeper than a simple story of betrayal and exposure. It's a blueprint of what happens when the truth meets resilience, clarity, and timing. Every plot, every scheme, every secret plan they thought would destroy you didn't just fail. It backfired in ways they could never anticipate. They cracked because they underestimated your ability to survive and outgrow their manipulations. They spilled everything because guilt, fear, and self-preservation overtook the lies they had built their entire operation on. Every move they made was mirrored back by your presence, your awareness, and your unwavering strength, exposing not just their intentions, but their very nature. From the moment you refused to play the role they scripted for you, to the moment your silence and resilience forced their lies into the open, the story unfolded like a lesson written in plain sight. They never expected you to outlive their storyline. They couldn't comprehend that your growth, your energy, your integrity, and even the quiet observation you maintained would dismantle their plans without a single confrontation. The people who thought they controlled the narrative discovered that their arrogance, overconfidence, and moral weakness were their own undoing. Every confession, every spill of truth, every collapse of the plot was inevitable, not because of luck, but because truth and resilience are forces that cannot be contained, manipulated, or destroyed. And the most extraordinary part, you didn't have to fight. You didn't have to prove anything or chase justice. Everything they tried to hide, every strategy they carefully orchestrated, came crashing down simply because they were not ready to face you, not ready to face the consequences of their actions, and not ready to see themselves through the reflection you revealed. The story that unfolded is proof that integrity, awareness, and unshakable growth will always expose deception, no matter how carefully it is hidden. If this breakdown hit you hard and gave you clarity on just how unstoppable truth and resilience are, make sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss these eye-opening revelations. Like this video, if it gave you chills, comment below with your thoughts or experiences, and share it with someone who needs to see how power and truth always find their way. This is a moment of awakening, and you're witnessing it firsthand. Stay connected, because the story doesn't end here. Stay blessed always.